Welcome to Local Leverage, your competitive edge in business. As always, today's show is brought to you by Property Radar, the hyperlocal lead generation platform for small local businesses. Look, the builder market has changed. Incentives are heavy, buyer timelines are longer, and more deals are leaking between initial interest and signed contracts. In this tight environment, the question becomes what lead generation strategies are actually working to keep builders profitable in these conditions? Today, we're joined by Frank Martin. He's a builder by trade, a former Microsoft leader, and now co-founder at HomeBuyMe, a real estate tech platform built specifically for home builders and investors. Frank operates at the intersection of builder marketing, buyer intent, and offer submission. He has a rare vantage point into where leads originate, where conversions break down, and how to remove the friction to drive real results. Let's get into it. Frank, welcome to Local Leverage.
Hey, I'm excited to be here. Thanks, Mark.
Yeah, well, let's jump right in. What are you seeing as the number one reason that buyers are stalling today? Is it the rates, or is it monthly payment shock, or uncertainty, or just too many options? Just curious your perspective.
Yeah, I appreciate that. It's a great question because it seems to be regional for sure. We're located up in Seattle, as you know, and there's a lot going on in the market here as far as layoffs with big tech, creating uncertainty around, where your finances are going to land. Certainly the rates being high hasn't helped much. I think there's a lot of volatility across the country, whether it's, politically or at the federal government level. I think all of those things sort of stack up and have certainly kind of kept people on the sidelines rather than jumping in the game.
Yeah,
It requires a lot of creativity about how we're going to move stuff, you know. But
absolutely.
I don't think demand has changed. I think prices have also remained high, which also I think has slowed people down a bit. But now we're starting to see some compression in that. So, hopefully some of that supply will move. Some of my colleagues, for the entire third quarter moved 4 or 5 units, and then in January alone they moved 5 units. So I
Wow,
think
that's
things
good.
are things are starting to move.
That's good. Hope that's what we can expect to see going forward. So, I've seen builders using incentives heavily, and that's not a new thing, but I'm curious in your experience, do these incentives really bring in the serious buyer, or is it just the tire kicker or somebody, looking for a deal?
Yeah, I don't think it brings in tire kickers. I do think that it brings in serious buyers, mostly because it's free money. We're seeing buyer incentive plans. The lenders are getting really creative in putting out, 7-year arms. The first year is, 199. I mean, we haven't seen rates like that since pre 2005.
Yeah, yeah,
It's kind of hard to say no to that when, it's a 7-year arm. To me, that's an eternity as far as owning a home these days. Uh,
yeah,
so I mean, it's kind of funny to say that, especially, you know, being as old as we are, got a few grays, but at the same time, I think, this sort of modern generation of buyer, they're looking to kind of move a lot faster than we did, you know?
yeah.
Um, and I feel like if you're starting out on a 199 that jumps to a 299 in year two and a 399 in year three, and then caps at a 499 for the rest of the time, I mean, I don't know how you can get any better than that. So I do believe that it brings serious buyers to the table. Buyer incentives, like this are definitely working.
Cool. Yeah, that makes total sense, and it certainly seems like an attractive offer to get people in. Um, I heard that right now, like prospective buyers are often taking up to like 6 months or longer. I think like 60% of them are taking up to 6 months or longer before actually pulling the trigger. Um, as you think about lead generation, what should builders be doing differently in that first month versus the subsequent months of nurturing those individuals?
Yeah, this is a tough one, because it's hard to, like, as a builder, we're out in front of these projects anywhere from 6 to 18 months, and we're trying to figure out how to price them, so that they move. And, obviously we're doing that forward thinking. So it's tough to figure that one out because you want to be as aggressive as possible, but you've also got some real sunk costs as far as land purchase, interest
Right.
carry, all the build risk that you take. And that can be anything from material spikes to, shortages, depending on what type of events are going on in the market at that given time. So, I think being aggressive with price seems to me always the thing that that moves the needle. It's certainly great to have other incentives, stacked onto a good price, whether it's a rate buy down or closing credits, or just upgrades inside the house. I think you really got to nail your build. Younger builders may not have the same level of buying power and or discounts that some of the more seasoned builders do. So it's tough to nail that build if you're over a certain, budget that you had allotted. It's kind of tough to be aggressive on price in the future because you've got to make your money back.
Sure.
So I think there's a lot of factors there that ultimately will allow you to be as aggressive as you can on month one, and whether that's nailing the purchase of the asset that you're, the investment that you're going to develop, or nailing the build. And then working with your partners, title, escrow, lenders to compress pricing in any way you can. And of course, your real estate commissions too. That's a big one. What can you do to ultimately give yourself the best opportunity to nail these buyers day one versus 6 months in,
Yeah, exactly.
you know?
Exactly. It's real costs around that. Yeah. So I'm
Yeah.
curious about lead generation in your space. If you're just thinking about kind of like, the top 3 to 5 lead sources that builders are using now that deliver results, with like the best cost per contract, what would those be?
Yeah. I mean, historically it's been, you know, real estate agents, brokers in the field, people aggregating and selling out, that are flipping at least permitted contracts. Those have always been like primary source leads, but they're really expensive. Um, So, I know this podcast is certainly sponsored by Property Radar, which is an amazing tool to use, especially if you understand how to really search down, whittle things down to get your targets. So, I do think historically, brokers have been number one, but what we're doing, and trying to be effective at it is how can we buy it better? And if that means we're generating our own leads and issuing our own contracts to purchase, like that has been, I would say out of the last 6 or 8 deals we've done, you know, the best ones in it are the big deals that we find on our own. Because when we have the ability to negotiate directly with the seller without a middleman, I find that we can do more creative deals at a better price, which ultimately will help us out, not only like to make an affordable product, but better margins for us.
Yeah, absolutely. In marketing or lead generation, it always seems like there's a new shiny object. I'm curious from your perspective, in the builder space, are there certain channels that you think are overrated in 2026? And if so, like why do builders continue to use these channels and chase these things?
Oh gosh. The why I don't know, but the channel that I'm really fed up with most is social media. There's so much noise in the space,
Yeah.
and it's almost like a cost of doing business. Like you can't not be there, but when you start throwing money at it, we've just seen not a lot of conversion in the social media side. It's great to have video content. It's great to push it out there, but I haven't really seen it lead to anything as far as real sales.
Yeah.
But, I think builders are still throwing it in there because it's like, well, your competitors in there, competitors putting content out, so you should put out content.
Right.
I just find that it's just noisy. It's a noisy space. Um, and you're competing for a very like finite set of eyes. Like the pond is pretty small. Um, as far as like who's buying real estate and searching social media at that given time.
Right. And, and just the challenge of, are you going to be the one that the algorithm surfaces when the person does
Yeah.
indicate that they're looking? It's a very tough game. And I think that people often underestimate the real costs. And it's not necessarily the dollar cost because it's effectively free to post, but the time and energy and showing up and having good content and trying to compete both with other really good content creators and now exacerbated by the fact that there's so much AI content. Like, how do
Uh,
you stand out? It's so hard.
yeah, honestly, it feels so daunting. And we're a small to mid-sized builder. We work with a lot of big builders, but what are our budgets? You're starting to look at these developments where, if we don't have the budget to spend several hundred grand on, a social campaign that not only like shoots, but also continue to leaks and follow
Yeah.
up. I mean, it just is like,
Yeah.
man, I'm kind of scratching my head a little bit saying, okay, we can't throw money into that sort of bottomless pit because it just is not returning, you know?
Yeah, I mean, the other thing on that, I think, is that it's not a quick return, right? It's not like identifying a target and going and connecting with that person. You're casting this net, and that could take months or even years to build up enough
Yeah,
audience and algorithm favor to make that work. Yeah.
agreed.
So, given that, and or maybe just given the importance of working every lead effectively, um, how do you make sure that your speed to lead, if you will, is optimized? How fast do builders need to respond to leads that either they're generating or that they're getting from other sources to make sure that they're getting the best appointment rates and ultimately getting the most deals?
Yeah, I mean, this is an interesting one because this is where a lot of friction lies in the process of buying real estate. If you're listing a property with a listing agent, right? They're the ones who are on the hook to respond to these leads, right? So you're relying on someone who is ultimately not only working solely on your stuff, but they're working on a lot of different things because they're ultimately trying to earn, which makes sense. But when you have a lead that comes in, given where we are in the market, there's a lot of supply, at least, in certain types of products that we're putting out there, whether townhomes or such. I mean, you've got to jump on the lead like right away. And honestly, like you've got to be able to have that conversation directly with them. I feel is the best chance for success. The longer it languishes, you know, if you really think about just us as a society about how quickly we want something, like we go
Yeah,
on Amazon and we order something and it's here within 24 hours. Like think about that. Like that's the behavior you're
yeah,
setting across everything. So
that's
here
right.
you are, putting your product out there and someone messages you and you don't get back to them for a week. They've moved on.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
I mean, it's got to be timely within the first 24 hours at a minimum. That's what I think.
Yeah, I think that's right, and I see that across kind of other real estate centric spaces as well, whether that be mortgage or investors or realtors. You have to be really quick and
Yeah,
intentional, and then I think also have to show up with that the right messaging to make that all
agreed.
work. I'm curious in your space on kind of the new construction side or new construction buyers. What are the common objections that uh, people raise, and how do you help position yourself, to address those and overcome those?
Yeah, that's always an interesting one. I find that on our feedback loops, the things that we get are kind of spurious. Like there's not a lot of depth to them. It's like it's on a busy street. It's like, yes, it's on a busy street. Nothing we can do about that. Or, the closet was too small or so on and so forth. Like those types of things, we get a lot of those. Um, I find that it's hard to get real solid feedback as to why. But I think like, one thing I definitely underestimate, more often than not, and I have to be reminded of it, is that buying a home is a very emotional experience, right?
Yep.
It's especially a new construction home, especially if the first one. I mean, you start kind of having these certain things added into the stack, and it just gets exponentially more emotional. And I think that at the end of the day, it's either right for someone or it's not. I mean, there's so much information you can get out there. You can learn a lot about a location without even going. You know, but I think that once usually a buyer walks through, no matter what they say to me, I think at the end of the day, they're either feeling like that they can picture themselves there or they can't.
Yeah. Is there a way to kind of meet them in that emotional space? Because you're absolutely right. I mean, just kind of thinking about that process. And as you mentioned, like, not only is it maybe the first time they're buying a brand new home, but it could even be a first time purchase. And all of those are ratcheting that up. And so how do you show up to meet them in that space and make that okay and help them navigate that emotional process?
Yeah, that's a good one too, because I feel like it depends on who your sort of director of first impressions is.
Yeah.
You know, who's on site. It's typically not going to be the owner, right? It's going to be some
Right.
representative of the owner or a real estate agent. And it really depends. I find that, I mean, it's important. Like you run a big organization, you can kind of cascade like what you'd like to have happen to everyone, but not everyone might interpret it differently. And by the time it gets to the last one, it's like playing a game of telephone, you know,
Absolutely.
what did you
Yeah.
say from the top? So I do feel like that's a challenge to meet someone where they're at. It depends on who's there. But what I'm finding more often than not is that if you meet someone with authenticity, and some sort of just saying like, hey, this is your decision. It's a big one. You know, I find that you're going to get more out of that versus somebody really like I, I bring up agents a lot, but I find that agents will sometimes work a deal because they're ultimately wanting to get paid.
Yep.
It
Yeah.
may
They want to
be,
close the deal. Yeah.
may not be in the best interests of, the buyer. It may not be in best interests of themselves. It may not be in the best interest of the builder. But at the end of the day, like, I think if you kind of no pressure sell people and you're just there to answer questions and there to be like empathetic in some ways, like if you can
Yes.
meet them, then I think that you have a much better chance than, scaring someone off. And you know how that feels. It's like you have a conversation with someone that is really working you over. It's like
Yeah.
you
It's not comfortable.
you need a
Yeah.
shower afterwards, you're like,
Exactly.
yeah,
Yeah. No, it's yeah, exactly. I think that I agree with what you're saying. And I think that applies well across most sales relationships, right? It's like if you show up with empathy, like to use your point,
yeah,
and a genuine desire to help them or to help them navigate through this process, that's about the best you can do. I think that you're going to form a good relationship, and
yeah,
uh, yeah. And I also still think that that can be a very effective way to get to a close. I don't think that those are mutually exclusive. So I
yeah.
totally agree.
And the business is ripe for it. If there's any time that, this type of, acumen gets applied to it, now's the time. It's the market's ripe with a lot of just not authentic people,
Yeah.
you know, out there kind of selling and hawking real estate. I think that, with these big changes that have come up with like the lawsuit with NAR that took place, right? The class action lawsuit.
Yep.
Um, there's a lot of conditions that have presented themselves that allow the real estate sort of transaction process to change for the better towards the consumer, which that is great. I think if you've got the consumers back, you'll always win, you know?
Yep. I agree with that. I agree.
Yeah.
So when we talked about, on the social side, like maybe that being overhyped and an area that you don't want to be leaning into, um, as you think about lead generation that is working well, what are the tools that you would recommend to builders to be using in this year to generate leads and hopefully convert more deals?
Yeah. Yeah. No, great question. Certainly like for years, title companies have been an excellent source of getting the data and the leads that you need.
Yep.
Um, it's usually free, um, and it's powerful. Um, but not everybody has a relationship with a title company, right? So what other things do you use? I honestly like, I'm not trying to like give you a high five, but
I'll take a
Property
high five.
is fantastic because it allows me, at least as a builder, to, to search, really, really like have a defined search about what I'm looking for. Um, so I love that feature about Property Radar, that I can get down to the, 5 or 6 properties in an area that I want to target. If I can get their contact information even better, and then ultimately making that first connection is key. I've been leaning in a bit with a new platform that we co-founded called HomeBuyMe, which we talked a little bit about in the intro, um, which ultimately allows me as an investor to make an offer on a property by myself and then have it reviewed by a processor and ultimately an attorney. And then I use DocuSign to ship it over to the seller. Why I love this is that, historically I've either gone to an attorney, which can cost me anywhere from 3 to 5 grand, or, I've asked a real estate agent to help me out, which usually I'm negotiating some sort of
Yep.
commission rate. But this is like under a grand, and I can build a transaction myself on state forms and have it reviewed by an attorney. So it's like the same every time. Those tools, as far as speed to market, I mean, if I do a search with Property Radar or through my title company and get that information to make contact, I can have an offer in someone's hands literally within hours.
Yeah,
That
that's cool.
that speed to market and that least amount of friction and then direct buyer to seller interaction, to me, is probably the most powerful thing you can do as an investor and as a builder.
Yeah, I agree with that concept. I think that maybe, you alluded to it like, hey, I'm going to identify this target group of maybe just five, right? So you're getting very niche and very targeted,
Mhm.
and then I'm assuming you're showing up with a very hyper local messaging and content. I'm curious about that. I mean, how important do you feel it is to use hyper local content, whether that be like school zone pages and neighborhood guides and community specific details when you're driving kind of leads? And is that an underrated thing or an overrated thing in your view?
Yeah, from an investment perspective, I don't think it's overrated. I do think that there's a lot of hyper local content out there these days, right? And it's really easy. So the things you're talking about is schools and so on and so forth. Like you can get that off of any Zillow or Redfin, or that's all there. The stuff that I find that's super important these days is just economic type things. Like something as simple as like federal investment into a military base. You know, we know if money's coming in, then ultimately more jobs are going to be created and ultimately more housing is going to be required. Like that type of hyper local content, pretty
Yeah.
important when you're even trying to market.
Yep.
This is only this new home development is only 3 miles from the base. I mean, I'm just using this example, but we have this here in Washington, where we have these large investments, whatever it is, whether it's state or federal funds, you know, or it could be just transit, anything like that. We have a new rail going in, and there's transit oriented development that takes place. So that to me, that economic hyper local content is
Yep.
really drives a lot as far as my investment and where we build. How we market to those ultimate buyers, or unless we're just holding for land bank, or if it's just a rental property, the marketing definitely will center around those things. As far as schools, distance to work, so on and so forth. So I mean, real estate's a local business, period. You know, um, for the majority of people in it. I mean, obviously there's some big dogs that are across the United States, but for me, I'm a a regional builder, I'm a local builder, and to me, hyper local content, depending on what it is and what stage you're in, is so important. You
Yep.
know,
I'm curious, and this is probably very specific to your business and in your area, but I'm curious as you're thinking about these targeting opportunities, are you seeing the most opportunity within kind of these relocation buyers, or are they move up buyers or first times, like you mentioned? What is the kind of hot niche that you're focused on?
um, I think relo is probably has been the segment that's moved the most. in some ways, I think move up buyers haven't really moved up because the asset that they have is not necessarily the house, it's the loan instrument attached because the interest rate is so low. Like, if you're going to, why would you trade up to a 6 or 6.5% interest rate when you're sitting on a 2.5% interest rate? So we've seen it just in like the remodel side of things where they'd much rather remodel what they have and make it sort of their forever house versus, go buy something else. That's changing, but that's kind of been the way
Yeah.
it's been rolling the last several years. New buyers, like first time buyers, I feel like a lot of times it's all economically related, whether they get off the bench and get into the game or not. And so, you know, uh, we've just seen a definite compression in new home buyers because they're losing their jobs. And if you don't have a job, then, you're kind of waiting until
Yeah.
things kind of normalize. So
Yeah.
I would say, to your question, I think relos, usually there's some sort of life event or conditions that I've set up where they have to do something.
Right.
And,
Right.
I think they're usually like in that top tier. They would be number one for me.
It's funny you say that because I think that's what I was thinking about, especially as you talked about, these people sitting on really low interest rate mortgages. Um, Especially in like the mortgage space, I hear, mortgage brokers making excuses for themselves by saying, oh, well, people are locked into their mortgage, right? They're locked into these things. But the reality to your comment is no, there's life events going on. Like people are locked into life. And if life changes, they have a job that takes them somewhere else, or they go through a
Yeah.
divorce, or they have these other situations occur, whatever those are, it doesn't matter if you're sitting on a 299 mortgage. You're going to make a
Right.
move. And so I think being aware of those life events and tapping into those as opportunity uh, makes the mortgage rate less important. It's
Yeah.
still an issue, but I don't think it's like the ultimate excuse anymore.
Yeah. Random sidebar. Earlier in my career when I was working in entitlements for a builder, and I just remember sitting at a town meeting where everyone opposed this apartment complex. And this was back in Massachusetts. And it was a town where they were just they had like a serious NIMBY going on. Like, don't put this here.
Right.
Interested in it. It's going to, attract deplorables, so on and so forth. And this one woman stood up and talked about the development. Now we didn't hire her. We didn't do any of this, but she spoke about how she had gone through a divorce and wanted to raise her children in the town that she grew up in and couldn't afford a home. And this apartment complex was going to allow her to do that. And she looked around the room and she said, I just want everybody to remember that we're all just one life event away from, making a change that, I mean, it was poetic in a way because but the whole mood of everything turned because here was this person who grew up here and was part of this community and wanted to be a part of it, but there wasn't enough variability in the housing stock to allow her to do
Right.
it. And this was the next like thing for her. So I learned that lesson early on in my career. And I would agree that life events are what you have to pay attention to, period.
Yeah.
That matters most because we
Love
just only here for so much time.
exactly. No, love that story. That's cool. And it really makes that point nicely. I want to shift gears a little bit and just kind of thinking about the sales process a bit, for the builder and the friction points that exist. And I'm curious from your vantage point, what's the most unnecessary friction point in that builder sales process today? Here's your
I'm gonna,
soapbox.
I'm gonna, I'm gonna alienate all my real estate friends. So I honestly find real estate agents to be challenging in that process. Not so much on the listing side, but a lot of listing agents still sit for their open houses, right? They farm their open houses out to buyers in their offices. Like, hey, come sit on my listing. You can kind of farm buyers that way. The problem with that for me is that someone then inserts themselves into the sales process of maybe they don't understand my product or my process. They want to be relevant. They want to try to, show value to their client. And ultimately what they end up doing is creating more friction. And I would say 60 to 70% of my transactions, that happens. So to me, from a new home perspective process, I mean, you can kind of see this even with the big nationals. The big nationals have their own sales center and they're like, okay, great. You bought a buyer, sign here. We'll send you your commission when this closes. Let us deal with it. And as a builder, I want to be direct to that customer because at the end of the day, like when everybody collects their money and walks away, it's me and that buyer that are going to be working together on quality, concerns, if there's any defects that we have to repair. We're married, we're in business for several years after, like post closing. And I just find that, the sooner we can cut away the fat and work directly with one another, the better off we are. So I find the biggest friction in the marketplace, honestly, from a new construction process, are real estate agents.
That's interesting. It's something I hadn't really considered, but as you explain it that way, I can see why that represents friction for you. And also I can very much appreciate your desire to get belly to belly with that buyer and directly interacting with them throughout the process. It makes all the sense
100%.
in the world for you.
Yeah. I mean, we get calls all the time from people, it's like, hey, can you come look at this? I know you built this. I mean, we're out of our statute of limitations as far as warranty is concerned, but we still have a great relationship with them just because we're available, capable. We built the place. Who knows where that real estate agent is at this point? They're gone. So it's just a matter of like, to me, again, the sooner I can get, face to face with my buyer and start working, and everybody comes to the table with, good intentions and authenticity, I think that to me is the key. That to me also feels like where the biggest friction is. Now it's a double-edged sword because, once these listings are on MLS, agents tend to bring their clients in.
Sure.
So, and not all agents are bad. I don't mean to say that at all. I just feel like if I'm looking across the transactions that have had the most friction in them, they're usually with a greener agent that ultimately someone called or someone got picked up somewhere along the way that, is trying to be relevant.
Yeah. And you mentioned HomeBuyMe a little bit earlier, but you stepped in to help build HomeBuyMe to address this friction point, correct? And curious,
Yeah.
maybe unpack that again for us and put it in the lens of this friction point you just described and how it alleviates that.
Oh, on the builder side. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. So the investors, we already covered that, but the builder side, what we've been doing, so we have a professional side of this thing, which is more B2B, where we basically take, so as a builder, I have a lot of custom forms. I'll have my own purchase and sale agreement, I have a builder's warranty and addendum, so on and so forth. So this package, if you will, is what I prefer buyers to use because it's got everything kind of spelled out, the sales process, so on and so forth. The nice thing about HomeBuyMe is we can ingest all of those forms. And so if you think of TurboTax meets real estate offers meets LegalZoom, right? They're basically filling out a step-by-step, field by field, question by question, set of prompts that populate my forms. And with HomeBuyMe, the great thing about it is that the way it's set up is that the legal representation is direct to that buyer. It's not somebody we've hired. So as a builder, now I'm providing legal advice and expert advice to this buyer, at no charge to the buyer. And then when they're ready to go, it DocuSigns to me and I get a full package, which would include, all my docs, if it requires them to upload a pre-approval. And if not, like we have preferred lenders that can have in-app capabilities to basically go to a pre-approval site if that's what they need. But to me, it takes a lot of the friction out of the sales process because now what I get is a bona fide deal that is on my forms and really saves me a lot of time and provides, it provides the buyer a better service. Now, I think the way I would look at it is almost like a point of sale transaction platform for real estate, meaning like we still will offer co-broking. If somebody wants to bring in a deal, we'll still offer that. But here's an opportunity for me to go direct for the first time,
Right.
in a transaction platform way, in a modern way. And so that's the way I look at this, as sort of a next generation platform that shouldn't be a threat to real estate agents, because at the end of the day, it takes the liability off the table for agents. It allows the buyer to kind of go through the process, on their own, but maybe consulted by their agent. But the cherry on top for me is that, okay, I'll pay for the transaction platform for anyone that wants to use it. But if I get a direct deal and I can save myself 3 points, or even more than that, then I've ultimately starting to like make this a better process for me as well.
Yeah, and I think beyond, I mean, what it sounds like is it's much better for you, but it also still provides that buyer the representation that they need through the process.
Yep.
Um, yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
So,
It's been pretty sweet the way it sets up, and ultimately it's just a co-branded website, and we take in all of the builder's inventory. And so the inventory pops up. You click on the community you want, then you click on the unit that you want to make an offer on, and it starts the offer process. So, you know, that's how simple it can be, for a buyer.
yeah, makes sense. I mean, as you look forward and or think about, employing that more for your business and for others like yours, I mean, do you see the builders who simplify this process by using a tool like that are going to then outperform those that are just increasing marketing spend to get more opportunities at the doorstep?
That's the goal. It's the goal for everyone, is to ultimately like add in a tool that allows somebody to get ahead. I don't know if that'll happen, but to me, it was a bleeding neck in the industry. Like, how do we make homes more affordable? How do we give buyers and sellers a better experience? How do we streamline the process? How do we like, yeah, I mean, this was the idea behind all of it. And I think if you're using it in a way that is I mean, the way I kind of look at it is sort of, the way the travel industry has changed over the years. Like, at first you used to go into the travel agent's office and pick your vacation, and then the
Right.
internet modernized these aggregators like Expedia. And then at some point, you have your favorite airlines, and now you just book directly to them. It's an evolution. I think real estate is on that same path, where we're at a point where things are going to start to change and modernize, where you can start buying directly from folks.
Yeah. I appreciate you coming on and sharing this. I think I learned not only about the Home Buy Me platform, but really just about the builder perspective and how that intersects with these different points, and
Yeah.
in a way that I hadn't really considered in the past. And so I appreciate you sharing some of that expertise.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
So, Frank, if people want to take advantage of Home Buy Me and start to strip away some of that friction, how can they learn more about you and get started with it?
Oh yeah. Thanks for asking, Mark. We actually put together like a little promotion for the audience. It's an exclusive offer. It's a limited time. But the idea behind it, if you want to try it, we're offering 50% off of your first Home Buy Me offer using the code PLUS. So all caps, PLUS. So on top of that, with Property Radar running that free 5-day trial, it's sort of a kind of great 1-2 punch about what we've been talking about, is getting that sort of hyper local targeted, list of properties to go after, and then sending them contracts when you've made that contact.
Fantastic. Well, thanks for offering that to the local leverage community. Much appreciated, and we'll be sure to check that out.
Absolutely. And additionally, you don't necessarily have to buy. You can always set up a demo at any given time, and those are free. So we offer those to anyone who comes to the site as well.
Fantastic. Thanks for the offer. Appreciate it.
Appreciate you. Thanks so much, Mark.